What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. I want to lead this episode with this. Contrary to what Eagles fans may believe, I don't hate Jalen Hurts. I've been watching Jalen Hurts ever since he first started for Alabama as a true freshman for Nick Saban. I admire how, despite when he got benched in favor of Tua in the national championship and was regulated to being his backup, instead of transferring, he decided to stick with the program, grow and develop. And when Tua went down in the SEC title game against Georgia, Jalen Hurts came in that game and saved the day for Alabama. And then he transfers to Oklahoma, ends up leading them to the college football playoffs. He was a Heisman finalist, and he has gone on to have a great NFL career up to this point. I never questioned one time how good Jalen Hurts would be in the NFL. I always believed that he would be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. But the issue that I have with Jalen Hurts is how he's discussed. Because the way Jalen Hurts is talked about is everything wrong with NFL discourse right now. Jalen Hurts wins the Super Bowl, and people use that as a knock against him. He's the beneficiary of playing on a God squad, when every quarterback that's in the Hall of Fame that has a Super Bowl ring wasn't able to do it without playing alongside of other Hall of Fame level players. Outside of Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, those are the only two quarterbacks in the history of this game to be able to win championships in spite of not playing on stacked teams. And even then, both of those guys have played with their fair share of Hall of Fame talent. But Peyton Manning played with Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne. Aaron Rodgers played with Hall of Fame level talent. Every quarterback that wins a Super Bowl outside of Brady and Mahomes needs a stacked team to do so. If you were to name your 5 best quarterbacks in the league right now, they all would have elite players around them. Jalen Hurts, just because he won a Super Bowl on a stacked team, doesn't diminish his value to the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a top 5 quarterback. What makes Jalen Hurts great is how consistent he is in the playoffs. When the lights are the brightest and the pressure is at its highest, that's when Jalen Hurts plays his best football. And you know what you get out of Jalen Hurts in every playoff game that you see the Eagles in. You know that he's going to take good care of the football. He's not going to do too much to keep the team from winning. And he's going to do what's necessary to win. That's what makes Jalen Hurts an elite quarterback. I'm not going to argue against Jalen Hurts being elite, because he is, in my opinion, and he also is a top 5, top 6 quarterback in the game right now. It is idiotic that we use Jalen Hurts playing on a stacked team against them and try to demean him as a quarterback, because he has the beneficiary of playing on a team that was properly constructed. Jalen Hurts is more than a taxi driver. He is not a system quarterback. It is hard to win a Super Bowl in the NFL, no matter how talented you are. Even if you're playing on a good team, there's no guarantee that you're going to be the guy hoisting that Lombardi trophy at the end of the season. My issue that I also have with the Jalen Hurts discourse is how he highlights the problem with ring culture in sports. Because Jalen Hurts winning a Super Bowl doesn't make him better than Lamar, Josh Allen, or any other quarterback that doesn't have a ring. Because rings don't define talent. Being the most accomplished is different from being the most talented. Why Brady is considered the GOAT is because he was able to elevate Patriots teams that weren't expected to be Super Bowl caliber teams without him. Same thing with Patrick Mahomes. When Tyreek Hill got traded to Miami, that was the first time the world wrongly predicted the downfall of the Chiefs dynasty. Brady and Mahomes can win with anybody. Outside of those two quarterbacks, everybody needs talent around them to win. I hate how Jalen Hurts is used to put down the greatness of Lamar Jackson. Because if we were to discuss who is the most talented quarterback in the history of the game of football, Lamar Jackson, without a doubt, would be the number one guy. Because we've never seen a quarterback that has entered the league with 4.2 speed, with the ability to throw the football on the Aaron Rodgers level of efficiency. Lamar has the fourth highest career passer rating in the NFL. He had 40 touchdowns and less than 5 interceptions last season. That is Aaron Rodgers' level of efficiency. He's a 2-time MVP and a 3-time first-team All-Pro. Just because he doesn't have a ring doesn't demean his greatness, and it doesn't mean that Jalen Hurts is better than him. I can believe that Jalen Hurts is an elite quarterback, but not view him as the best or the second best quarterback in the game. That's not hating. That's just personal preference. And if you think that Jalen Hurts is better than Lamar, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, whoever, I'm not necessarily going to entirely disagree with you, but do you have a nuanced argument to pair along with him having a Super Bowl ring? Because winning a Super Bowl is just a small part of the equation to when you assess how good a quarterback truly is. There are other things that goes into building an argument for Jalen Hurts as how he compares to other elite quarterbacks in the NFL. What are his personal accolades? Winning a Super Bowl is not the end-all, be-all. There are plenty of quarterbacks in the history of the league that have won Super Bowls despite not being Hall of Fame level talents. Joe Flacco, Trent Dilfer, Brad Johnson, all three of those guys have Super Bowl rings, but Dan Marino doesn't. But none of those guys come anywhere close to Dan Marino, in spite of him not having a ring. Charles Barkley doesn't have a ring, and yet he still is one of the greatest players in NBA history. But yet, Bill Russell has the most championships in the history of the NBA, but he's never brought up in the GOAT conversation like how Michael Jordan and LeBron James are. Winning a championship is a small piece to building the argument for how good a player truly is. It is not a logical argument to solely justify how good a player is just because they have a ring and the other guy doesn't. If we compare Lamar and Jalen Hurts from a talent standpoint, Lamar is in a completely different universe from him and every other quarterback that has touched the football. There has never been a quarterback as more gifted than what Lamar Jackson is. If you were to create a quarterback in Madden with 99 everything, 99 speed, 99 throw power, 99 accuracy, that's what Lamar Jackson would be. Jalen doesn't need to be Lamar to win. But winning a Super Bowl doesn't necessarily mean that he's better. He just was able to execute in the biggest moments, and Lamar hasn't been able to do that, along with not just him, but the entirety of the Ravens. We seem to forget that Jalen Hurts didn't win the Super Bowl by himself. He won it because he was on a good team, and the Eagles do what the Ravens have been unable to do, which is not beat themselves. You don't see the Eagles having big drops in crucial moments, like how the Ravens did with Mark Andrews when he dropped that 2-point conversion, which would have sent the game to overtime. You didn't see A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith fumble the game on the 1-yard line in the NFC Championship. The Ravens' shortcomings are not because of Lamar Jackson. It is because this is a team that, as a whole, beats themselves. The coaching isn't always up to par like what it is with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles have been a better overall team, especially in big crucial moments, and gotta have in moments, than what the Baltimore Ravens have been in the playoffs. Jalen Hurts highlights the issue that we have with quarterbacks that we don't perceive to be extremely athletically gifted. We want to demean their success because they are the beneficiaries of playing on a good team, and we overlook their importance in winning those championships. But we also use Jalen Hurts to put down other quarterbacks that don't have a championship just because he does. And we overlook that football is not 1 versus 11, it's 11 versus 11. And everybody else has to go out there and do their job in order to win. For the first offseason of my life, the Dallas Cowboys are actually not being overhyped. They actually are being incredibly slept on for a change. What went wrong for the Cowboys last season is that they got ravaged by injuries. Dak Prescott got hurt, Trayvon Diggs, Demarion Overshaw, and a bunch of other key players for Dallas went down in 2024. You also had a run game that was non-existent at times. You were 27th in the league in rushing yards per game, and that contributed to you having the worst red zone offense in the NFL. If you can't run the ball, you're going to have a hard time punching it in for 6 when you get into the red area. And going into this season, the Dallas Cowboys are being underestimated due to the question mark that Brian Schottenheimer is as their new head coach. We don't know too much about Brian Schottenheimer. We know that he's been a member of the Cowboys coaching staff for the last couple of years, but we don't know how integral he was to the Cowboys' success. And when he got hired at his introductory press conference, it also doesn't help that Jerry went out and said, "This is the biggest gamble I've ever taken in my career." So, with Brian Schottenheimer being the Cowboys' new head coach, how is his hiring going to impact the performance of this team? Look, the Cowboys, despite them being cheap in free agency, they draft better than the majority of the NFL. They do a really good job of finding talent in the later rounds of the draft that turn out to be studs, such as DaRon Bland, Demarion Overshaw, hell, Marquise Bell. One of the more underrated defensive backs in the league was a UDFA from FAMU. They also don't whiff on too many of their first-round picks, so they do a really good job at finding talent and developing it. And another thing is that they normally have a really good defensive coordinator. Matt Eberflus is their new DC this year. And Mike Zimmer last year, his defense wasn't good because he was outdated. That was probably the worst defensive coordinator hire that Jerry Jones has made in a very long time. Well, this season, Brian Schottenheimer, with Matt Eberflus calling the defense, and with Dak Prescott coming back healthy, you also add George Pickens, which now gives you one of the best wide receiver duos in the league with him and CeeDee Lamb. You're going to have a really good offensive line. The Cowboys, to miss the playoffs this year, Brian Schottenheimer has to be the worst head coach in the NFL for that to take place. He has to be Urban Meyer level bad for Dallas not to make it to the postseason. Their schedule is not that tough, and they are good enough to split the season series with both the Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles. And at best, they could be a 12-13 win team. At worst, they win 9 or 10 games. And Jerry Jones, although he does hire guys that are yes men, he doesn't hire head coaches that just can't coach at all. At worst, they're average. They can get you to the playoffs, but they won't get you to a Super Bowl. Jason Garrett, Mike McCarthy, they were that. They were good enough to win you a few division titles, get you to 10, 12 wins, and come playoff time, at best, you made it to the divisional round and you were getting sent home. And Brian Schottenheimer, he's the son of Marty Schottenheimer, who was a really good coach. He was unable to win the big one, but he was good at building teams up from nothing, getting them to the playoffs. He just was unable to get over the hump. And if he's anything as what his dad was, he should turn out to be a really solid coach. Jerry doesn't make a bunch of bad hires in terms of finding guys that can be consistently winning coaches. He just doesn't hire guys since Jimmy Johnson was gone that can get the Cowboys back into the Super Bowl conversation legitimately. Because from a talent standpoint, the Cowboys have a good enough team to win the Super Bowl, but with Jerry Jones' interference, he holds this team back. Brian Schottenheimer has good energy. The players seem to like him a lot more than what they did with Mike McCarthy. And when the Cowboys first hired Mike McCarthy, we knew that it was a Jerry Jones motivated hiring. He just wanted somebody that he could control. And Brian Schottenheimer is somewhat the same way. But at least this is a guy that players are going to play harder for as compared to Mike McCarthy. So this season, I see the Cowboys being 10-7, making it to the playoffs, possibly being able to make it out of wild card weekend, and who knows how far they can go after that. The playoffs is something that can be unpredictable at times, but if Jerry Jones actually made a gamble that pays off, then maybe this is the one that can reward him, giving him another Lombardi before it's time for him to call it quits, although some may argue that it already is time for him to hang it up. But he does a really good job of putting good rosters on the field. Now it just comes down to this team being able to execute with the coach that should be able to maximize what is one of the better teams in the NFL from an on-paper standpoint. I don't see Brian Schottenheimer being one of the worst head coaches in the league, because if that happens, I think it's a sign that Jerry Jones just has to go ahead, throw his hands up, and give it on up. But I don't see that happening. You got to be pretty freaking bad to not be able to win with this schedule and with the team that has a top 10 roster in the NFL. I've been at war with Chiefs fans all offseason long because I'm picking the Chargers to win the AFC West this year. And ever since I was in 8th grade, the Chiefs have won this division, which makes picking somebody else a hot take. But the reason why I'm confident the Chargers will win this division this year is solely because they have Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh has a resume of winning everywhere that he's been. His first 4 seasons when he was the head coach of the 49ers, and his first 3 as the head coach, he led them to the NFC Championship and the appearance in the Super Bowl. When he went to Michigan, he led them to 3 straight Big Ten championships and a national title win before he came back and returned to the NFL. And Jim Harbaugh is not Brandon Staley. He's not Anthony Lynn. He knows what it takes to build a winning football team. You cannot compare this year's Chargers teams to the ones that we've seen in the past because they didn't have Jim Harbaugh. Yes, they were hyped up in the offseason because they had talented teams, but they had poor coaching. That's not the case with the Los Angeles Chargers this year. Last season around this time, the only person in the mainstream media that picked the Chargers to make it to the playoffs was Colin Cowherd, who was also right on the Denver Broncos. You got to give the man credit when he's right, and he definitely hit a grand slam having the Broncos and the Chargers in the postseason. And the reason why the Chargers were slept on around this time last year was because they didn't have a stacked team. But if you have watched Jim Harbaugh over the last decade he's been a coach, he hasn't won because of having elite talent. He's won because of his philosophy, which is he wants to play bully ball on offense, and he wants to have a defense that can suffocate you in the red zone. And that's how the Chargers are going to win the AFC West this year. They're going to have a bully ball mentality on offense. They're going to work you like a boxer in the 10-round championship fight. For the first 5 rounds, they're going to hit you with a few jabs, work your body, and then in the last 5 rounds, that's when they're going to try to deliver some haymakers and knock you out. The Chargers want to run the air out of the football with 2 of the most bruising backs in the league, Najee Harris and Amarion Hampton. Amarion Hampton is the equivalent to Unstoppable. If you ever seen that movie with the train with Denzel Washington when they were trying to stop it, that's what Amarion Hampton is. The dude is an absolute war machine at running back, and any defense having to tackle both him and Najee Harris is going to get worn down over the course of 3 quarters. Then in the 4th quarter, that's when those runs of 2, 3, 4 yards start to turn into runs of 10, 15, and 20. And when the Chargers get that ground game going, that's what's going to help them beat the Kansas City Chiefs and keep Patrick Mahomes off the field. That's going to help them keep Bo Nix and Geno Smith off the field, because there's more than one way to stop an opposing team's quarterback, and that's simply by not allowing them to get a lot of opportunities to possess the football. The Chargers could get the ball with 8 minutes to go in the 4th quarter, and the other team may not get another chance to touch it for the rest of the game, because their ball control offense is going to be that good this year. They got one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. They added Mekhi Becton in free agency. You got Joe Alt going into his 2nd season. They are going to force every possession to matter when you are the opposing offense and you're going up against them. And it's going to be hard to score against a Chargers defense that last year was 2nd in points per game allowed and red zone defense. So now you're going up against a team that doesn't give you a lot of opportunities to possess the football. And then when you do get your opportunity to score, they hold you to 3 in the red zone. They have a bend but don't break defense. Jesse Minter not only is one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL, but he is a pending head coach in waiting. He is going to be a hot head coaching candidate at the start of next year when a bunch of head coaching jobs start to open up. He's eventually going to fill one of those roles because how good he is at getting the best out of this defense when they get you into the red zone. When they get you into 3rd down situations, they get you off the field. They force you to settle. So with Jim Harbaugh finally having a full off season to build a team that fits his strengths, they're going to be able to knock off Kansas City for the AFC West. The Chargers don't need to have a bunch of great wide receivers to win, because Jim Harbaugh has never won having elite playmakers on the outside. When he went to the Super Bowl with the 49ers, his 2 best receivers were Michael Crabtree and Vernon Davis, who is a tight end. This dude is old school smash mouth football. He's all about imposing his will physically on the line of scrimmage and having a suffocating defense in the red zone. Greg Roman is his offensive coordinator. Everywhere Greg Roman has gone, he has produced a rushing attack that has been no less than top 5 in the league. The dude knows how to cook up an elite rushing attack. And with the philosophy that Jim Harbaugh has, it's the perfect recipe to slowing down the Chiefs and Andy Reid with Patrick Mahomes. Because if you can keep them off the field and you can slow them down when they do have opportunities to where they do have to settle for field goals instead of touchdowns, that's their way to win, along with taking down the Broncos and the Raiders. I'm not picking the Chargers to win the AFC West. I'm picking Jim Harbaugh to win the AFC West. So when you come at me in the comment section and you compare the Chargers to what they've been in the past, I'm going to look at you like you need to go get your ears checked, because I'm not picking the Chargers to win this division. I'm picking Jim Harbaugh to win it. He's the best head coach that this franchise has ever had, and his resume shows that he is due to win this division sooner rather than later, and his time is now. We are about to get incredibly toxic because we got to talk about head coaches that are coaching for their jobs entering the 2025 NFL season. Who could end up getting the pink slip at the end of this year? Starting off with Cincinnati Bengals head coach Zach Taylor. He is entering his 7th season. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's been to 2 AFC championships, winning 1. But ever since their second AFC Championship appearance, they have missed the playoffs for 2 consecutive seasons. And if they miss it again this year, without a doubt, it'll be his 3rd strike. He'll be up on out of there. And they already are at a disadvantage because they are allocating over 40% of their cap space to Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Burrow. And if they pay Trey Hendrickson what he's asking for, then you'll have 4 players taking up over 50% of the salary cap, which would give the Bengals roughly around $1.2, $1.3 million to spend at their other starting positions on the rest of this team. And they are a bona fide 7-on-7 team. And yes, the Bengals defense did cost them a lot of games last year, but the year before that, when Joe Burrow went down, then they had Jake Browning at quarterback. They missed the playoffs that year. And yes, Joe Burrow getting injured does give Zach Taylor a little bit of breathing room, but Mike Tomlin has made it to the playoffs for 2 straight years with way worse quarterback play than what the Bengals have had out of Joe Burrow. So Zach Taylor has to get Cincinnati to the playoffs this year. I don't think it's going to happen. They don't have a complete team, and they essentially have to win games this year the same way they did last year, with their defense getting even worse, losing their leading tackler, Jermaine Pratt. Sam Hubbard retired, and you might not have Trey Hendrickson this year if you don't pay him, and you won't even pay the guy who you drafted to replace him, and Shamar Stewart. Mike McDaniel, his first 2 seasons started off really promising. He led the Miami Dolphins to back-to-back playoff appearances, but they underachieved relative to the amount of talent that they had going into those seasons. They have had some really good teams. They start out the season hot, but then once you get into the month of October, late November after Thanksgiving, when the real football season begins, when it starts to get cold and you got to be able to run the football, that's when the Dolphins end up folding. They never finish the season as strongly as how they come in starting the season. And this year, with the arrival of Mike Vrabel in New England, and then you also got Aaron Glenn and the Jets, who could be really interesting, there's a high chance that the Dolphins end up completely imploding. They miss the playoffs, and they finish in last place in the AFC East, which leads to Mike McDaniel getting fired. He's an incredible offensive mind, but the players just don't seem to respect him, and this team doesn't have the physicality necessary to win playoff football in the month of January. Shane Steichen, he was the guy who was responsible for Justin Herbert having that prolific rookie season. He also helped Jalen Hurts elevate his game to an MVP level when the Eagles first lost to Kansas City in the Super Bowl a few years ago. And when he took this job in year 1, they went 9-8. They were really close to getting into the postseason that year. And then last season, they went 8-9. So he hasn't completely bottomed out. But with how well the Colts have drafted, this is the year where it's playoff or bust. And with Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson being your best 2 options at QB1, not only do you risk missing the playoffs again, but you also risk being one of the worst teams in the NFL. And in year 3, having no playoff appearances, that would be his 3rd strikeout. And the Colts would be searching for a new head coach at the start of 2026. So it's playoffs or bust for not just Zach Taylor and Mike McDaniel, but Shane Steichen as well. Brian Daboll is in a really interesting situation because unlike the first 3 coaches on this list, I don't feel like it's necessarily playoffs or bust for him. Because the Giants, their owner has to be realistic. They have no chance in hell at realistically making it to the playoffs, and arguably the toughest division in the NFL, with the Commanders and the Eagles, who are both Super Bowl contenders, and also the Dallas Cowboys, who also have a really good roster and are a 10-win team on most occasions when they're playing at their best. And Brian Daboll, he drafted Jackson Dart, which I think gives him another year. If he can at least find a way to get the 7 wins, that should be enough to keep his job. And if you were to take the Giants out of the NFC East and you put them in the NFC South or the AFC South, they could easily win those divisions because they don't have a bad team. They actually have a pretty solid roster. The issue is that they just have a gauntlet of a schedule. This is one of the most difficult schedules in the history of the NFL. And I was going to pick the Giants to be my biggest sleeper team this year until the schedule came out. And I was struggling to find more than 4 or 5 wins on that thing. So they're going to have to pull a couple of upsets. But Brian Daboll, his first season as a head coach, he led them to the playoffs. They won the playoff game with Daniel Jones over the Minnesota Vikings. And it's just been downhill from there. They went 9-7-1 his first season. Then they won 6 games in his second year. And last year they only won 3. He has to find a way to get this team at least in contention to where they're fighting for a playoff spot for the majority of the year. And then they just get out-rostered. I think John Moore would have to consider giving him another season, especially when you invest the first-round pick in the Jackson Dart. You don't want to set his development back by giving him a new coaching staff and having to learn a new system. Todd Bowles, now unlike the other 4 coaches on this list, he's made it to the playoffs every season that he's been the head coach of the Buccaneers. He also has won his division every year as well. But the issue with Todd Bowles is that making it to the playoffs is expected. Winning the NFC South when you've had the most talented team in this division for the duration you've been a head coach doesn't earn you any brownie points. You are judged by what you do in the playoffs, and Todd Bowles is 1-3 in the playoffs. His only win came when the Bucs beat up on a depleted Philadelphia Eagles team 2 years ago. You lose to a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels. You lost to the Detroit Lions. Todd Bowles, he has to at least get the Buccaneers to the NFC Championship this year, because if not, he is essentially wasting a Super Bowl caliber roster. If you put a better head coach in this situation, that possibly could get this team back in the Super Bowl conversation. And nobody mentions the Buccaneers as Super Bowl contenders because of Todd Bowles. And if it wasn't for the Falcons choking during the second half of last season thanks to Kirk Cousins, he might have already gotten fired. So Kirk Cousins low-key saved Todd Bowles' job, at least for this season. But I think that runs out. He's on his 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 seasons. The chances of his 3rd OC still being as good as what his previous 2 were are incredibly slim to none. And his defenses aren't necessarily the greatest, and they aren't good, or they aren't well coached against good teams, especially in the 4th quarter. They had the worst record in what position games in the NFL last year. I think that Todd Bowles is a dead man walking in Tampa if they don't win a playoff game this year, or at least make it to the conference championship. Raheem Morris, he's in a similar situation to what Todd Bowles is, although he doesn't have to necessarily win a playoff game, but he has to make it to the playoffs. Last season, the Falcons were predicted to be a playoff team. They had a playoff caliber roster, but they underperformed because the defense was really bad. And when you specialize in a particular area of the football, and that happens to be the worst part of your team, it's a red flag about you as a head coach. The defense got carved up by Bo Nix. They got carved up by Bryce Young the final week of the regular season. And we all can't forget the awful clock management, which led them to losing to the Commanders in overtime in a game that they had to win to maintain control of the NFC South. And this year, if he doesn't get the Falcons to the playoffs, he definitely isn't going to get a 3rd season. And him and general manager Terry Fontenot are going to get the boot. And lastly, I have Arizona head coach Jonathan Gannon. He's going into his 3rd season, and the Arizona Cardinals have improved every single season under him. His first season as the head coach, they went 4-13. Last year, they doubled their win total, going from 4 to 8. And there were a handful of games that they lost because they just choked in the final seconds, like against the Buffalo Bills early during last season. They were up on them big. Then the Bills came back from behind. If they can learn how to win the close games against good teams, this definitely should be a playoff team. They do have a team that's good enough to compete for a playoff spot in the NFC. You also have a talented quarterback in Kyler Murray, who has been really inconsistent at times, but the defense should be really good. And Jonathan Gannon is a really good defensive-minded coach. So if the Cardinals don't make it to the playoffs this year, depending on what their record is, if they miss it being 9-8, that's understandable. But if they go 8-9 again, then maybe you start having discussions about him getting fired. But I don't believe that his seat is as hot as the other 6 coaches on this list. So let me know your guys' thoughts on the head coaches that I have on the hot seat that are coaching for their jobs entering this season. Who do you think is most likely to save their job, at least for another season? And who do you think is a guarantee to end up getting replaced at the start of next year? On the last episode that we did, I picked the Houston Texans as my dark horse Super Bowl contender, which made a lot of Jaguar fans incredibly upset with me. And for those of you guys who don't know, I live in Jacksonville. I spent my entire life in this city. And I had a bunch of friends who were blowing up my phone, angrily texting me that, JT, you tripping picking the Texans to be a dark horse Super Bowl contender. You're sleeping on the Jags. We got a shot to win the AFC South. Look, I love my beloved Jacksonville Jaguars, all right? But the Jaguars are not ready to compete with the Houston Texans this year. Other than the wide receiver position with Travis Hunter, Dami Brown, and BTJ, the Texans clear the Jaguars on every other position. Quarterback CJ Stroud's better than Trevor Lawrence. The Texans defense is miles ahead of the Jaguars. The Texans have one of the 5 most talented defenses entering this year. They got an elite secondary. They got a really good front 7. And the only concern that the Texans have is their offensive line, which is the same concern that the Jaguars have coming into this season. They had to revamp their offensive line just like how the Texans had to this offseason. But the Jaguars just have way more question marks than what the Texans do. If the Texans get solid offensive line play, they're going to be a Super Bowl contender. Meanwhile, the Jaguars, you have a new head coach in Liam Cohen, who I'm really high on. I don't question if Liam Cohen is going to be successful. I just don't know if he'll be successful immediately to the point where the Jaguars can challenge the Texans for the NFC South. I see Liam Cohen in his first season at best winning 9 games, because you still have to see how consistent is Trevor Lawrence going to be. We know when Trevor Lawrence is playing at his best, he's good to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But the issue is that he's been consistently inconsistent up to this point. He struggles with ball security. Sometimes he can just get happy feet in the pocket when you get pressure on him. And the defense has issues on the interior defensive line. The secondary has some holes. You got Jerry Jones, who had a pretty promising rookie season. You got Travis Hunter, who should be good playing both ways, corner and receiver. But Tyson Campbell, he hasn't been as good as what he was during his rookie season. You also have another hole at safety. The Jaguars just have more questions that I have to see them get answered when the season kicks off than me having confidence in picking them to challenge the Houston Texans for the AFC South. I'm not questioning if the Jaguars have the ability to surprise us and win the AFC South, but I just have to see it to believe it, because right now the Texans have a squad that's just an offensive line away from bursting that Super Bowl bubble, which has mainly been just the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Bills. The Texans can definitely enter that conversation. And also what Jaguar fans have to realize is that with how badly Trent Baalke drafted these last couple of years, he also set this team back a year or two. What is the difference between the Texans and the Jaguars is that the Texans have nailed most of their draft picks. Some of the best players on the Texans roster, they drafted. They were homegrown. Jalen Petrie, Kamari Lassiter, Derek Stingley, C.J. Stroud, Nico Collins. On the other hand, the Jaguars have whiffed on a bunch of picks. Trayvon Walker, I don't necessarily think he's a bust, but is he going to turn into an elite player? Because he's a B-tier level player, but he's not an A-tier level player like Aiden Hutchinson is. Can Trayvon Walker truly become a game changer for this Jaguars defense? Because if he is, along with Josh Allen, then you essentially have a top 3 pass rushing duo in the league, and that definitely could be good enough to put you in the forefront as a contender for the AFC South this year. But I just need to see it to believe it with the Jaguars first, and there's a lot of stuff that has to get played out on the field that I'm not confident right now in saying that the Jags are going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Houston for this division. The Texans are just miles ahead of Jacksonville right now in terms of their coaching staff with D'Amico Ryans, who is one of the best up-and-coming head coaches in the league. He already has a proven franchise quarterback in C.J. Stroud. The Texans are just more proven than what the Jaguars are, and that's why I feel like they're a sure thing to win this division for a third straight season, because C.J. Stroud's rookie season, the Jaguars were locked to win this division. But as soon as you give the Jaguars expectations, that's when they disappoint. I think the Jaguars are better when they're underlooked and they're slept on versus when everybody starts singing their praises. And right now, the Jaguars got to be that underdog. They got to be that sleeper. They have to show it. And I got to see it to believe it, because the Texans have a damn good team. That secondary is outright terrifying. Not only do you got Derek Stingley, arguably the best cornerback in the league, but you added Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. You got Kamari Lassiter, who had one of the best rookie seasons for a first-year defensive back. You got Will Anderson going into his third season. He could end up being an all-pro this year. The Texans just have studs all across the board. If that offensive line ends up improving, they're going to be in the Super Bowl conversation this year. The Jaguars, they have some ways to go before we start talking Super Bowl with them. We have to see if they can actually have a winning record first with Liam Cohen. So that's why I view the Texans in a lot higher regard as what I view the Jacksonville Jaguars. They just have been more proven on the field, more consistent, and it's just a bunch of unknown variables that have to play out with the Jags this year in my eyes. Other than quarterback, the position that has the biggest impact on wins and losses is kicker. Think about how many games are won and lost because of field goal kicking. There are a lot of games that come down to one possession when kicking is the deciding factor. The Steelers' MVP on their offense for the past 3 seasons has been Chris Boswell. When they've been unable to put points up on the board, Chris Boswell has been reliable for him. Last season, the Cincinnati Bengals paid Evan McPherson before they extended Jamar Chase. And not just that the Bengals defense cost them a spot in the playoffs, but also Evan McPherson missing a handful of field goals, which would have flipped a lot of those losses that the Bengals had into wins. Justin Tucker, he left a lot of points off the board for the Ravens last year. If he was his old self, the Ravens possibly could have beaten the Buffalo Bills. When you have a reliable field goal kicker, you have a high chance of winning close games, because special teams is an underrated factor when it comes to winning games against good teams. Think about how good the kicking was for Kansas City last year. They were in a one-possession game damn near every single week, and they were winning those games because They had not just good coaching, and they had one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but they also had a reliable field goal kicker. The Dallas Cowboys have a kicker that can make field goals from nearly 70 yards out. When you have a field goal kicker that once you get into the 60-yard range or 58, 59 yards out, they become a weapon. Because all you got to do is get to the middle portion of the field and you're within their range. It pretty much makes it where every possession, you could put points up on the board. And when you have bad field goal kicking, oftentimes it can ruin your season. The New York Jets last year, as much as how Aaron Rodgers gets all of the blame for how left things went last year, the field goal kicking was a huge detriment to the Jets season. They had some missed field goals in that Monday night loss against the Buffalo Bills. They had a few other missed field goals that costed them in a few games. You don't necessarily always got to have a high-powered offense to win, but you got to have an offense that can put your team in position to put points up on the board, and that involves having a kicker that can be trusted to bank those field goals. Think about Young-Ho Koo with the Atlanta Falcons. They lost some games over the past 2 years because of him, despite him being regarded as one of the better kickers in the league. They extended him not too long for a reason, and now there's a chance that he could end up getting replaced if he struggles again this year. Kicking gets so overlooked because it's a position that nobody pays attention to when it's good, but when it's bad and you got a guy missing field goals, wide left, wide right, then that's when everybody starts complaining about it. It's the same thing with the offensive line. When the team is dominating and having success, nobody ever talks about how good the big boys up front are. But when the offensive line is bad and it's getting the starting quarterback crushed, then everybody starts crying about it. Kicker is so important to winning in the NFL, because when you're going into these one-possession games against playoff caliber teams, if you don't have a good field goal kicker, that can be the difference in your season ending early and your season carrying on for another week. You gotta have a guy who can make those clutch field goals for you in those big moments. And oftentimes these kickers fail to deliver. There are only about 3 elite kickers in the NFL. Other than that, you can't trust any of these kickers with the game on the line. And the reason why I'm bringing up the importance of kickers is because with me betting a lot during the football season, I've had a lot of parlays ruined, a lot of big paydays destroyed because guys, which only responsibility is to kick a damn ball through the upright, can't do their jobs right. Kicker is literally one of the most easiest positions in the NFL, yet it has such a big impact on flipping games that nobody ever talks about how important it is. Now, you can say that pass rushers, offensive tackles are more important to wins and losses, which I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you on that, but you can overcome having bad offensive tackle play. You can overcome not having a lot of talented pass rushers, but it's hard to win if you don't have reliable field goal kicking, because you could end up like how the Bengals were. As I said, it's not just the Bengals defense that kept them from making it to the playoffs, but the fact that they extended the kicker before the season that just folded every time they needed him to make a big field goal to help them win those one-possession games. That is oftentimes the difference in a lot of these losses that these teams have.